Hey, 1301. My last lecture cut off because I got a spam phone call. And C. Rob said many bad words. The spam phone call came from Davenport, Iowa. I would give you that number and have you call them, but I realized that hackers will hijack like an innocent person's number. But it's the morning. I haven't had any coffee. And now I'm grumpy because the spam call messed up my lecture. But I think we stopped about with in the outline, can we trust white male writers from the past? If I ask my face-to-face students that, generally they would say no. But then it begs the question, if we can't trust the white male writers from 1700 on Native American history, what do we do about the history? I think Native American culture was primarily visual, comparable to our emoji culture. But if the only version of their history was written by white people, and you're writing a paper, what do? You can maybe be critical of the rich white men, but that doesn't get you any closer to the truth, the history of the Native American people. The next in the outline is your term paper research. So it's midnight, you're writing a paper on Native American history, you have 10 articles in front of you, and they say different things. A 1950s version, a 1970s version, a 2010 version of the truth. Your paper's due at 9 in the morning, what do? I've said this before, maybe you go with the version of history that lines up to what you think, to what your family thinks. Maybe you go with a modern version, books from 2018, 2019, 2020. Maybe you go with books from texas.edu, presses, publishers that you trust. But, ultimately, your paper still has to be written. One of the Tompkins questions asked, what advice would you give a freshman if they were going through the same problem? Maybe you have to power through, go with what you got. Maybe you can be critical of the source you have. I don't know, but you have to power through. And that's one of the questions Tompkins asked at the end, and she seems fairly pessimistic. I say we live in the age of alternative facts. I give an example about Wikipedia. What internet sources do you trust? A lot of my professors in the past wouldn't let me, cite Wikipedia because, any random person can change Wikipedia. Most professors at Odessa College won't let you use Wikipedia. So it brings up the question, what internet source, what source in general can you trust? And again, if you have time, do the research and figure it out on your own. But I realize if it's midnight and your paper's due at 9, you got to power through and write what you write. But maybe you should believe in what you write. The next question, do Americans, Westerners, need to apologize for being the dominant culture? So it's kind of like the example I gave about the Northwestern professor that went to Bali to study. His name was Clifford Geertz. I'm actually thinking it was in my dissertation. He read Balinese culture through sports, but he would pepper that document with little asides that I'm from Chicago. This is what's normal to me. So if you're an anthropologist writing about another culture, somewhere in there you have to give little Easter eggs, I think that's what they call it, who you are, where you're from, and that sort of explains why you think what's normal. I didn't say that well. Native American sources, our sources versus their sources. I talked about that before. There's a lot more American sources, white people sources, than there are Native American sources. So you have to take that into account. The next section asked a little bit about Tompkins' intro. Tompkins says she's a little girl in New York. She goes to a fair. She falls in love with Native American culture. She wants to be a Native American princess. And I will ask my students, is that okay if a rich white lady from New York wants to be a princess, sympathizes, loves Native American culture? And usually my face-to-face classes say that's fine. A couple minor points. What does a Japanese textbook say about World War II? That's another example about revisionist history. I can't read Japanese, but I would imagine a Japanese textbook from World War II paints the Japanese sympathetically. Japanese are the good guys. The capitalist Americans are the bad guys. What does an American mainstream textbook say about slavery? And that's changed over the years too. I would imagine a 1970s textbook, what it says about slavery in America is radically different than a 2020 textbook. I grew up in Virginia. Maybe there's a difference between a Texas textbook and a Virginia textbook. Middle East, there's a section on, or there's an outline bullet point on winners writing the history books. You probably heard that before. What do you think about that as a concept? Is there anything we can do about that? That in the history of the world, the rich men have generally written the history of whatever time and place. All authors have agendas. So, some authors want to be famous. Some authors want to make money. But is any author out there writing on Native American culture from a completely pure perspective? Or you always, maybe I'm asking, do you have to read the authors? So in the process, you've got 10 books in front of you. They say different things. Do you have time to do research on those authors, why they wrote their book the way they did? Everyone has their conditioning. Everyone has their own bias. Where you're from, your hometown, your parents, where you went to school, where you went to church, has an impact on what you think is normal, what you think is right, what you think is wrong. So, and if we're doing a term paper, do we have the time to do that kind of research on every author? It might be hard enough for a professor, let alone a 19-year-old in a humanities class. Toward the end, how to read cultural relativism. Does a student have time to research all these authors? Probably not. Authors' motives color their version of the truth. Perspectivism and how our knowledge is constructed. In the first question on your question sheet, it asks about meta-discourse. And meta-discourse sort of implies there's many versions of the truth about Native American history, about African American history, about Hispanic American history. So you're the teacher, you're the writer. There's all these different versions come together. Meta means many. So how do you pick and choose what is the objective truth? And I think Jane Tompkins implies you can't. It's complex and complicated. Do we need to study the history of the history? We might, but again, you're a student writing a paper. Do you have time to research what people in the 1950s thought versus people in 2000 thought? And finally, Tompkins' conclusion is pretty pessimistic. I like it because it's real. It's not sugar-coated. It's not linear. I think maybe in a lot of classes, if I go back to Walker Percy, it's A to B to C. This is the message. This is the moral of what you're reading. And real people in real time, stream of consciousness or whatever, there's a whole lot of different perspectives that come together that make the truth about anything. So, yeah, I mean, this is real. I think Jane Tompkins respects you as students, as thinkers, as writers. She's not sugarcoating it. She's presenting real problems in real time. And again, I'm sorry for the spam phone call. Bye.